Oh, great. Even when I don't owe anything, I write a one-page polite letter every April 15th to my friends at the IRS. I have a binder full of letters from every April 15th since 2000. It's a record of my involvement in peace and justice issues through the years. I add quotes from those who inspire me, like this one from Father Jerzy Popielwushko. To live in truth is to be in agreement with one's conscience. To me, war tax resistance is an act of conscience. I'm trying to be in solidarity with those who suffer from US policies. And when it comes to nuclear weapons, that includes every person on the planet. I recently read Annie Jacobson's Nuclear War, a Scenario. Very sobering. The DC area is the #1 target, nuclear target. My nephew, now a retired Air Force colonel, started his career in a nuclear silo in Arizona, then went on to serve at the Pentagon. He used to joke about having lunch at the Ground Zero Cafe. Many, many, many years ago, I read On the Beach by Neville Shute, and I just reread it. Haunting and instructive. Excellent motivation for those with qualms about paying for war. Here's another Jerzy quote, and I try to live up to this. In order to remain spiritually free, we must live in the truth. To live in truth means to bear witness to it, to the outside world at all times and in all situations. The truth is unchangeable. Truth cannot be destroyed by any decree or law. The source of our captivity lies in the fact that we allow lies to reign, that we do not denounce them, that we do not protest against their existence every day of our lives, that we do not confront lies with the truth, but keep silent or pretend that we believe in the lies. Thus, we live in a state of hypocrisy. Courageous witness to truth leads directly to freedom. One who bears witness to truth can be free, even though in a camp or prison. Thank you for listening. My circumstances may change, they likely will, but I hope part of my legacy will include war tax resistance. Thanks.
Thank you, Judith. What a witness. I was struck by your peace cranes in the background and a subtle note, and moved. Thank you by sharing your witness. As we're inspired both by Judith and our speakers, again, if you have any reflections you'd like to write down or put in the chat, we will revisit. Our next speaker is Lorin Peters, a member of Pax Christi Nuclear Disarmament Advising Working Group. And Lorin Peters served in the Peace Corps in Thailand from 1965 to 1969. Then he was a teacher of physics and of nonviolence for more than 35 years. From 2002 to 2008, he was a member of Christian peacemaker teams in Palestine. And currently, Lorin is a member of the Pax Christi USA's Nuclear Disarmament Working Group. Thank you, Lorin.
Thank you, Christopher. When I was 3 days old, my dad was recruited by the Manhattan Project. We moved to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where isotopes of uranium were being separated for the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. So I grew up in a fairly conservative Republican family. At age 18, I began studying physics at UC Berkeley, in the same hall where our top physicist had secretly worked out the plan for the atomic bomb, at least one of whom, Owen Chamberlain, became my favorite professor. My last year at Berkeley was also the year of the free speech movement, and it was also the year I encountered recruiters for President Kennedy's brand new U.S. Peace Corps. 1 week after graduation, I was on my way to Peace Corps training and on to Thailand. 2 weeks after starting the training, President Johnson announced we were going to join the war in Vietnam. Fortunately, the Peace Corps kept me out of Vietnam for 3 years. But then it brought me a serious death threat. That's a whole other story. And I began planning to get a gun. But then, by the grace of God, I was given a simple but powerful dream. An angel, or maybe it was Jesus, took me by the hand to go talk to the man who wanted to kill me. That dream, I now realize, very likely saved my life. It also dramatically changed my understanding of God's ways. Violence is never the way of God, the way of goodness. But I struggled for the 7 more years with the just war theory, which I was teaching, ironically, in a local Catholic high school, along with teaching the physics. I was afraid that I would not be strong enough to go to prison if I refused to pay my war taxes. But one day on retreat, an elderly peace activist, her name was Rose Lucy, said to me, "Lorin, it is better to resist war taxes as far as you can, even if you eventually have to give in, than it would be to never resist at all." That finally freed me to actually begin resisting in 1975. Now, in Berkeley, there was a commune called the Bartimaeus community, some of whom were organizing the People's Life Fund, a war tax resistance movement in Northern California. Each year, I would send them whatever taxes I was withholding from the IRS. They would invest their funds in local projects which were improving the community, for example, building solar energy systems. Then once a year, they would give out grants to local groups serving the poor. One of their options was, if the IRS collected on me, for example, by garnishing my paychecks, then I could ask the fund to return what I had given them. Well, some years the IRS collected, some years they did not collect. They added occasional penalties and/or interest charges, but they did not specify for which year's taxes they were collecting, so I had no way to calculate what they thought I owed. I would guess they actually collected maybe half of my war taxes. This pattern of redirecting my war taxes to the People's Life Fund and then requesting they be refunded went on for several decades. By the way, I prefer the term war tax redirection. I am not trying to overthrow our government, just to correct and purify it. Nowadays, I simply donate my war taxes directly to Christian peacemaker teams, which I served on, as you heard, which I served on in Palestine for 7 summers. If the IRS collects, then I claim that amount as a charitable donation, which it is. I don't know if the People's Life Fund knows that I'm still resisting war taxes. Maybe I need to tell them that. Anyway, I have found that people generally do treat me the way I treat them. Each April since Vietnam, I have written a letter to the IRS, politely but clearly explaining why some of my taxes are missing or unpaid. In the early years, I was called in for an audit maybe 4 times. The first IRS auditor loved what I was doing, and so he and I brainstormed for an hour how to convince the IRS to accept peaceful alternatives to paying for war. Unfortunately, the IRS eventually stopped auditing me and started sending form letters, which I ignore. They occasionally garnish 15% of my paychecks, now my Social Security checks, but penalties and interest charges and collections are still sporadic. For current advice, you could contact Lincoln Rice, who you will meet here in a minute, at the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee, that's NWTRCC, commonly called NUTRIC. If I may, I will share a little of my most recent Dear IRS Friends letter. And so after sharing my experience of the death threat and the dream, I wrote, quote, "I now know that Jesus' love your enemy actually works better than violence. When St. Francis of Assisi tried it during the Fifth Crusade, his enemy, Sultan al-Malik of Egypt, saved the Crusader army from starvation and eventually gave Jerusalem back to the Christian world. Gandhi tried it with the British colonial government, which eventually freed all its colonies. The Danish people tried it during World War II and saved 90% of the Jews, while the rest of Europe saved only 30%. Quote, in 1966, a boy from Tennessee who had unintentionally killed an old woman in Vietnam wept in my arms. The moral injury to our own soldiers of killing other human beings is still the primary cause of our 4,000 extra veteran suicides year after year. Israeli soldiers, not surprisingly, have already begun committing suicide this year. Quote, this year we are now encouraging the people of Ukraine to kill Russians, in spite of the fact that when Russia invaded Czechoslovakia in 1968, the Czech people turned the Russians around without killing them. Quote, as you can see, I still owe for last year. According to the War Resisters League, 43% of this tax goes to our military this year. So I have paid this 43%, in my case, $789, to Christian peacemaker teams, and I enclose a photocopy of that check with my return. My non-military balance, $1,047, is enclosed with this return. End of IRS letter. Each year, I would read my letter to all my high school students. Now that I'm retired, I read it to my confirmation students. I notice that when I teach, the class quiets down and listens. And sometimes we get into profound discussions. Thank you for listening. That's it from me.
Thank you, Lorin.
You're welcome.
And thank you for your donations and your redirections. Our next speaker is Lincoln Rice, PhD. He's the coordinator of NUTRIC, the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee, a coalition of local, regional, and national groups and individuals from across the United States who support war tax resistance. NUTRIC offers information, support, and resources. Lincoln Rice has been part of the Casa Maria Catholic Worker House in Milwaukee since 1999. Lincoln has a PhD in moral theology from Marquette University and has published in the areas of Catholic worker social ethics and Black liberation theology. He earned his undergraduate degree in accounting, and he has been the coordinator of NUTRIC since 2018. Hand off to Lincoln. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Judith and Lorin. I'm putting a few resources in the chat that I'll be more explicit about later, but I don't want to forget to put them in there. And I'm going to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to kind of interweave some of my own story, similar to what Judith and Lorin did, but also some of the kind of how-to basics of war tax resistance. Just to be clear, I just want to make sure everyone saw me switch slides to these important disclaimers. All right, perfect. So some of the some methods of war tax resistance are not legal. Anyone who attempts them should be prepared to face the risks of civil disobedience. Laws and policies are subject to change, but I can definitely during this time I'll share certain instances of what the law is, but also what's likely to happen. Similar to jaywalking's against the law. It's not, you don't get arrested for it all the time or get ticketed. War tax resistance counselors. So these are folks who are, we have war tax resistance counselors in most states in the United States who are volunteers who are willing to talk to folks in their area. And I put a link to them in that resource list. There might be a war tax resistor in your area. If after this you wanted to kind of maybe meet someone for coffee and talk a bit more in depth about exploring what this might mean for you, or just, seeing how that might work. But we don't give tips on how to fudge, cheat, or, gimmicks. We're here more just to be a resource for people who legally or illegally want to resist federal income taxes for war. Normally the person giving this talk might say, I'm not an accountant. Well, I'm not a CPA, but I do, like as was mentioned, I have my undergrad in accounting. I worked one tax season, decided I didn't like it that much, but it still kind of laid the background for a lot of what I'm doing now and some of my knowledge base. But to be clear, everything I've actually learned about war tax resistance and what the actual possible consequences could be are from being connected to this network of war tax resistors. I never learned in any of my accounting classes in college what would happen if you didn't pay your taxes. It was just assumed your clients will pay their taxes. So I was never given any advice about what to do if someone said, I want my taxes filled out, but I'm not going to pay. But I'm also not a lawyer, though in certain instances we do get legal advice from a lawyer to help us out, make sure that we're reading certain things accurately. And some, again, laws are sometimes subject to change, but we try to keep everything as up to date as we know about. The National War Tax Resistance, as was mentioned, it's a coalition of groups and individuals that's been around since 1982. And so there aren't as many local groups as there used to be for a variety of reasons. But in 82, the local groups wanted an organization that would be a place for kind of a information clearinghouse, especially so that you didn't have the group in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Portland, Oregon, and Portland, Maine, all reproducing the same resources as a way to kind of meet other war tax resistors and share resources and build resources together. So if you happen to go to our website and see like, oh, there's a local group in the Bay Area, the People's Life Fund, it's not like they're a franchise of Nutric. Actually, it's folks like that created Nutric, and they're the ones that run Nutric. So I'm not going to go a lot into these slides, but just I think much of this, I'm sure, is very people are familiar with this. The United States spends more money on its military than any other country in the world. When it comes to its own budget, here's the War Resistors League pie chart that was mentioned. So normally it's actually a little bit higher than we see here, but COVID spending definitely dropped the percentage to around 43%. But it's usually between 43 up to about 50% of the federal budget. The main push for this meeting is nuclear weapons, though many people who are war tax resistors, it also includes the military budget, border militarization, federal prisons, the militarization of police. There's a tank that was gifted on the cheap to Lakeland, Florida, that they're able to use there for whatever reason. The impact of war on the environment. The Pentagon's the #1 institutional user of oil in the world, but the climate agreements that are in place, like the Paris Climate Accord, it exempts emissions caused by militaries. So again, this is something that's not part of the future planning for the climate crisis. For myself, I got involved. I kind of maybe one of the defining moments that got me involved is kind of pushed me across the line to become a war tax resistor was that I remember during the Clinton administration, Madeleine Albright was Secretary of State, and she was asked a question about a UNICEF statistic that at that point they believed that about 500,000 children in Iraq had died because of the sanctions. And she was asked if it was worth it. And she said, yes, it's worth it. Now, to be clear, since then, we realized that UNICEF overestimated. It was probably around 200,000 children that had died and not 500,000, but that wouldn't have changed her answer. So, there's a variety of reasons that get people involved. The war in Gaza has definitely led to a new generation, younger generation of younger activists and younger people who have been contacting us and learning about war tax resistance. Here's just a list. I'll mention the earliest example in what's now the United States recorded example of war tax resistance is an Algonquin tribe refusing to pay taxes for a Dutch fort. More recently in Myanmar, after the military coup there, the public utility is used one of the main sources of revenue for the government. And so in 2021, millions of people there started refusing to pay their utility bills, which for some of them led to the military, coming into their homes with weapons and, attempting to force some folks to pay that to help support their government. So this is something that has a long and I think proud history. So there, which war tax resistance, what method is right for you? The greatest perhaps plus and minus about war tax resistance is there's no one way to do it, which can make it complicated because taxes are complicated. But on the other side, there's a lot of adaptation that people can choose a level that they're comfortable with for their own, for their own situation. So there's a lot of different things that go into figuring out what would be a good method for yourself. That takes some discernment. But essentially, the methods fall into one of two areas: refuse to pay some or all of your income taxes, and then either file or refuse to file. We'll get into why people might refuse to file, but that's anytime you refuse to pay any amount, it's a form of civil disobedience and illegal. The only legal method is to earn less than the taxable income limit. So that for many folks is what the standard deduction is, which I should have looked to think up the exact number. I think this year for 2024, it's $14,600 for a single person. It's double that for a married couple. But then people might also have additional deductions or tax credits that would make their taxable income limit even higher. So employees, I get a lot of calls from people when they start a job, or if they find out this past year, as younger folks have found out about war tax resistance, they wanted to stop withholding from happening to their paychecks. So in order to change withholding, if you're an employee, your employer knows how much to withhold based on a form called the W-4 form that you fill out either when you're first hired or the first day of work. Most people just kind of sign their name and say they're married or single, or, but a lot of people aren't filling it out correctly because it's just another complicated tax form. But I'm not going to go through how to fill it out for different situations, but there's on the resource list I shared, nutric.org/W-4. There we have a short 10-minute video, a double-sided flyer, and an 8-page booklet that can all just be viewed. So if some people want to know everything, they can read the 8-page booklet. If you are a visual learner, you can watch the video, and it just goes through what we call W-4 resistance. And so if someone filled out their W-4 form so that nothing was taken out of their paychecks, then it allows them, once April 15th rolls around, to decide if they actually want to pay or not. So even just doing that doesn't mean you're committing to refusing. You could still change your mind when April rolls around. For other folks, if you are getting a refund from the government and it's because you have withholding during the year, the video could actually be, those resources could be helpful in zeroing out your refund so that you're not giving the federal government a free 0 interest loan all year for what it spends its money on. The other common situation is for folks who are self-employed. So if you're self-employed, you work as a contractor or a consultant, if you're like a plumber that does work just for households, your income wouldn't be reported and it'd be on you if you want to file, and it's based on the honor system. But if you're self-employed and you do work, like if you're a graphic designer who does work for a number of newspapers, they'll probably have, since they're a corporation, they're required to fill out they'll have you fill out a W-9 with your name, address, social security number, and then at the end of the year, you'll get a 1099 income form. And if you have more than $600 or more dollars in income, it'll be reported. So for some war tax resistors who are kind of trying to drop out of being noticed, they might, try to be a carpenter or a plumber, or choose, I wouldn't say this is the norm, but there are folks that I know over the years who have actually chosen a trade based on it being something that's not reported. It's also, if you're self-employed, up to you to pay your own Social Security and Medicare. It used to be for folks that were self-employed but did their business with, say, eBay or Uber. In order for eBay or Uber, or these kind of the gig economy, that was a different kind of self-employment because you are not working for Uber or eBay. They're just a vehicle. You're getting paid and actually doing work for the people you're driving or the people you're selling to. So it was kind of a loophole where those eBay and Uber would only report it if you made at least $20,000 and had at least 200 transactions. But they're closing that loophole this year. They'll report income to the IRS of 5,000 or more, and next year it's going to go down to 600. So filing versus not filing. I've always been a filer. When I was single, and now that I'm married, my wife and I file. For many of the reasons that are listed here, it allows an opportunity to send a letter of protest, to make sure that if I do happen to be collected on in the future, I've filled out the forms, I know they're accurate. It can make IRS collection easier because before they can start the collection process, they need to assess your tax due. And if you don't file, in order to assess your tax, they need to file for you, which they're so underfunded right now that it's not a common thing for them to do right now. So you often fall through the cracks. Another advantage to filing is a 10-year statute of limitations for collection begins when the tax is assessed. So that's normally shortly after someone would file their taxes. Once that tax form is processed, the 10-year statute of limitations has begun. So I became a war tax resister in 1998. And, at that point, 10 years seemed like a long time, but now, every time a new year comes, old year of taxes due just totally disappears. That's completely uncollectible from the IRS. Filing can also make it easier to get scholarships, FAFSA, student financial aid. It doesn't require that you file, but they like to verify your eligibility based on income requirements by checking filed tax returns. So with families we've talked to over the years, some have had more or less success at finding alternative ways to verify their income, and it largely depends on who's assigned to your case of how flexible they are. Also, when the Affordable Care Act went into place, in order to qualify for health insurance subsidies, it requires that you file. For people who don't file, we would definitely recommend fill out your forms, because if the IRS does start collecting on you in the future and they filed for you, they're always going to file in such a way that they'll overestimate your income, which means they're going to overestimate how much you owe. So not only is there the interest and penalties, but they might even get more that they will say is principal. So, you want to always have the forms filled out so that you could dispute it at a future time if you need be. Again, it's difficult for the IRS to collect because they have to file for you. The statute of limitations doesn't go into play until after someone has filed for you. And there is a small additional penalty for not filing. So some myths about war tax resistance. Sometimes I'll be asked to speak to war tax resistance to a college group. And I know this in October, right as the invasion in Gaza began, I spoke at Manhattan College, and I think 3 times in the same talk, I was asked by 3 different students, like, "How come you're not in jail?" Like, it just, I had to answer it 3 times because it just wasn't seeking in. It's just part of our culture that you just assume someone's going to jail if they don't pay their federal income taxes. Since 1942, there have only been 2 people that have gone to jail simply for refusing to pay their taxes. Most of the time when someone Tony Serra on the right there, I think, is a special case because he's a lawyer, an activist lawyer, who they could prove that he completely understood what he was doing because of his legal background, and they really wanted to go after him. But for the most part, over the years, and especially in the last 30 years, the only individuals that have gone to jail for war tax resistance are those who falsified their forms. So we would definitely, unless someone feels they have a real compelling reason, if someone is going to file, we would ask that. We would strongly urge them to fill out their forms correctly. If you don't state certain types of income and it's obvious that you should have put them on there, the IRS is more willing to use its limited resources to either collect or criminally charge someone. Another myth is they'll take my house, car, and property of some sort. Actually, up until the mid-90s, it was very common for them to take especially cars from certain individuals, and in rare instances, houses. You'd hear about it every few years. They'd take a house just so people would know it could happen. But they really had a change of philosophy in the late 90s. I think they'd been a little overzealous and it caused a lot of bad press. And so they went from seizing about 10,000 or more pieces of property a year to now it's around between 100 and 400 pieces of property. And we haven't heard of anyone having a piece of property, car, house, or anything like that seized since the 90s. But again, that could change. The laws never changed about how the laws never changed concerning, if you owe this much, your house could be taken, but it was just a change in philosophy, not a change in the law. This came up earlier. Well, if you don't pay, they're just going to get it all in the end. And that does happen to some folks, but here, this is the IRS's own data. It's a little, maybe like 10 years old at this point, but it's the last year that they've reported this data publicly for. So they refer to the gross tax gap as the difference between what they know is owed minus what actually came in. And so 10 years ago, they believed that the tax gap, what people owed but weren't sending in, was almost $500 billion. And based on previous years of collection, they believe that for that year, 10 years ago, they would collect about $52 billion, which is around 12, 13%. So you can see the vast majority of folks at this time are never collected upon, or they only collect a small amount. Again, this could change if the IRS is ever funded probably how it should be. But right now, they're just so far behind in the collection process. It's more, I often refer to, if you're going to get a wage garnishment, it's more like the reverse lottery. It happens to some unlucky people, but it's not common. Lorin talked about redirection. So that's another, people often think, well, you're just doing this to keep it for yourself. So most war tax resistors, if they're the kind that are making more than the taxable amount and are refusing to pay some or all, they're redirecting it. So the Bay Area is very well known for every year having a redirection ceremony where they'll give out grants to local social justice organizations in the Bay Area. And oftentimes they're redirecting around tax day about 66, and usually between $50,000 and $60,000. So a lot of other folks just do it kind of on their own. But the New England area also has a very strong group that pools together and to do redirection. So what are the actual risks? Wage garnishment is not very common, but Social Security garnishment, because it's another federal agency, that actually is something that happens pretty regularly. With COVID, they still haven't restarted all the Social Security garnishments, though they could have about 3 years ago. So they're still in the process of trying to set those back up with people they already know about. And as was mentioned, for Social Security garnishment, they'll take about 15%. Sometimes, rarely, we'll hear about a bank seizure. With bank account seizures, they can take everything in the account up to the amount of the tax that's due. And so, and they'll also know you have a bank account if you've either had a refund or a check. If you sent them a check, either paper or digitally in the past, or got a refund, they'll know where your bank account is based on that. And so a lot of war tax resistors, including myself, I know I keep my funds in a non-interest bearing account. So just a regular checking account, because if you have a bank account and you make $10 or more of interest a year, that produces a 1099 where the income's reported to the IRS. And you'll know if it is because you should get one too. You should both get one. I have had my state refund seized in the past in Wisconsin. I used to overpay a little bit into our state's state income tax, but now I make sure I never overpay and that I owe at the end of the year, so that they don't get that refund. There is interest and penalties, kind of the general, and this I've seen work out, the general norm is with interest and penalties during that 10-year statute of limitations, you'll see your tax debt triple. You know, so if you decided, I just want to test the waters, you resist $100, after about 10 years, right before it would disappear, if they haven't collected it yet, you'd owe about $300. If you're resisting $1,000 for a given year, over the course of 10 years, it'd equal about 3,000. So that's a good rule of thumb, because the actual computation is very complicated. Loss of healthcare subsidies, that's happened to folks who are non-filers who initially got on Obamacare, and then eventually their state checked and verified that they weren't filing federal income taxes and they were removed. We talked about the difficulty in student loans. If you owe over $20,000, they'll file a public lien, or they might file a public lien in your county. So this happened to me a few years ago. I'm in Milwaukee County, and I received a letter from the IRS where they let me know that I have a notice of a public lien on file there. The main thing that will affect is I am a homeowner, and if at some point my wife and I sell our house, since that's a transaction that goes through the county courthouse, the IRS would get first dibs on the payment of those funds for the house before we would get them. So that's something that does happen. And passports, this went into effect in 2018. It's still unclear if this is legal or not. There's been a few court cases, but they haven't gone anywhere yet with a serious lawyer. They've usually been people who've represented themselves who've protested this loss of passport. If you have what's called an extremely large tax debt, in 2018, it was $50,000. This year it's 62, and it goes up usually $1,000 or $2,000 a year. But if your tax debt gets to, at this point, $62,000, they'll send you a letter that you can't renew your passport if you have one, or if you don't have one, you can't get a new one. So, and we've definitely seen that happen with folks in our network. Just briefly, you may have heard early in the Biden administration, the IRS was given $80 billion over 10 years. This has already been gutted a number of times to raise the debt ceiling with a compromise between the Biden administration and Congress. So it'll depend. We don't know yet if they'll actually end up doubling their workforce over 10 years. It'll depend what happens. Again, I just close with just emphasizing Nutric is a resource. Our website is huge because there's so many different types of war tax resistance and situations, and we've tried to cover it all on our website. So don't feel free to explore it. All of our resources are available for free there. We do have an option where people can go to our store and have them sent to you, and we're essentially just charging for paper production costs and all that sort of thing. But otherwise, you can always just download them and look at them for free. Lastly, there's also a penalty fund. They're separate from us, but they're a group that if you are collected upon, they pass the hat around. It's a mutual aid group. They'll pass the hat around to help reimburse people for interest and penalties. So it's another great way that we want to make sure people know they're not alone. But I'll stop there.
Thank you, Lincoln, for your nuts and bolts, and well as since 1998 to resistance remodeling. We are moving in this section along, and this afternoon's workshop is a discussion of war tax resistance. So we'll open it now for discussion. So in summary, our speakers gave testimony of this use of the tool of nonviolent resistance, and we're honored in their presence. We honor that witness with this workshop and how to. Thank you for your listening to our speakers, and we look forward to your questions posed in the chat, please. Judy and Lincoln are going to facilitate that, and so we'll be looking towards the chat for who and what question is.
And
If
I think
if it's difficult to use the chat, please go ahead and raise your hand using the features that are available in reactions. if you go to more on the bottom of your screen, you can click reactions and there'll be an option for raise your hand. Okay, if that's easier.
You got me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Lincoln. I noticed in your talk, you didn't mention much about frivolous. In my experience, the government uses a frivolous for anything you send in there with your taxes that they fine you automatically. So I thought maybe you'd like to share a little bit on the government view of being frivolous. It's not our normal, it's different. There, thank you.
Yeah, I can share it. It's not, I guess I skipped it because I don't know if it's really an issue anymore, but about around 2010, around that time, folks who were sending in letters with their taxes were getting hit with a $5,000 frivolous fine. And it was inappropriate because the frivolous fine is only supposed to be used if you're taking, let's say, a deduction. It's supposed to be something on your tax form that you're taking, such as a deduction that you're actually not supposed to take. And so it took a couple of years, and they actually collected some of that money from some of the folks who owed the $5,000. But we finally found the person at the IRS who handles quality control, and they agreed that this was an inappropriate use of this fine. And for the folks who had been collected upon, they actually refunded them their $5,000. So maybe like in 2021, there were 2 folks who were threatened with that frivolous fine again. But upon contacting the IRS, they dropped it immediately. So, but it seems like it's hopefully a dead thing that's not coming back in as a mistake.
Okay, can I add to that a little bit? When I filed for my election due process, and I filed a statement of conscience with it, it was considered frivolous at that time, and I had to go. Actually, went to court on that. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, Bill's a special case of someone who likes to go above and beyond. Oftentimes, before the collection process might start, or when could start, when they give you notice of it, they'll let you know that if they're mistaken, you could appeal it. So if you do what Bill did and actually appeal it, but your reason for appealing is going to be based on conscience, then you could also be hit with the $5,000 fine. They don't like you in creating a court case that they believe is based on frivolous principles, but that's a more uncommon situation.
Thank you.
I see there's a question about, my question is, can LLCs refuse to pay their taxes to resist war? I will say in the past, when companies have practiced war tax resistance, the IRS is usually more quick to try to collect on them. And if you have members, if there are other members who are part of that LLC, I believe all of you could become liable. So it could create an issue there. There have been war tax resistors who, there's some in the New England area that started a biking business that they'll haul away people's trash, haul anything, compost, every day. They do a bunch of hauling. They're called the pedal people, I believe. And they set themselves up so that everyone in that business is self-employed. So that way it's not the business that's refusing to pay. It gives if anyone as an individual refused to pay, then it just falls to that individual instead of the business. So if someone was thinking of starting a business and knew that they're going to be with others who are not war tax resistors, when you're setting up the business, I would talk to a lawyer, because how LLCs are set up, it's not like it's uniform. An LLC in Wisconsin is slightly different than an LLC in New York. You incorporate yourself on the state level, and so it's based on state law. Mary? Oh, you're muted.
So, well, thanks first of all, Lincoln, for all your experience and wisdom. So it would seem that a key first step is to not have automatic deductions or not having your employer deduct for you because once that's in the IRA's pocket, there's no way you're going to get it back.
Correct. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the IRS won't return it. I thought I saw someone raise the hand before, but I didn't see who it was. Or I see it. There's another. Oh, sure. Stuart.
Hi. Yes. So will that go? Do you know anything about like state IRS versus the national IRS? Because I haven't lived in California for 10 years, but I recently had one of my accounts cleaned out to zero. And when I checked on my bank, they referred me to a phone number and a company called California Franchise Tax Board, which I'm not even sure if that's, I don't know if that's real. I mean, I haven't even been able to get a hold of them. It's an automated system, and I can never get through to one person.
Yeah, no, great question. Thank you. There's I think it's around 35 states in the United States have an income tax. Obviously, California is one of those. And we, for a number of reasons, don't get into state income taxes because every state has their own laws about it, their own consequences, their own enforcement. So, you know, it becomes a bit onerous. The other reasons being that even though the state does often support the National Guard, some have the death penalty. They might be in support of militarizing police, but you know, there is a difference. For instance, they're not building nuclear weapons. You know, so they're, you know, they are. There is a difference in kind to some extent, also. But I will say, there are some folks among our network that also resist state taxes, but I would caution to look more deeply into that situation if anyone wanted to go that route. Unlike on the federal level, where Republicans, especially over the last 15, 20 years, have really become anti-IRS and have tried to defund it. On the state level, it doesn't matter if you're in a Republican or a Democratic state, they all want to fund their programs and what they want to do. So every state who does state income tax funds their revenue service very well. And they're much more aggressive, much more willing to charge criminally, much more willing to go right for people's bank accounts and all of those sorts of things. So unfortunately, I'm not familiar with the California situation or the group you mentioned. They could be a legitimate group that kind of deals with that, but it is what your situation or what happened to you is what I would expect for someone who resisted state income taxes. If they can find a way to get money, they're going to get it. So it's a very different kind of resistance. Ronnie.
You're still muted. You're still muted, Ronnie.
Lincoln, thank you. Could you tell us if Nutric has any idea, well, first of all, how many war tax resistors that Nutric is actually kind of aware of, an estimate of people who you're in contact with? And I assume that's a much smaller number than people who actually do war tax resistance. Have you ever tried to estimate how prevalent war tax resistance is in the United States?
Yeah, that's a common question. Ones that we were in contact with over the last few years, I would say probably around 2,000 to 3,000 folks. But then, beyond that, it's hard to say. I think especially because of the internet. People can come at our website, look at stuff, and if they don't have any further questions, we'll never know what they were there for. But those numbers, I think, are enlightening. We do have our statistics from our website. We know that before the invasion of, let's say, the 5 years before the invasion of Gaza, our website numbers were about 40,000 individuals, different individuals visited our website in a given year. And each one of those 40,000 individuals, on average, looked at 9 pages on our website. So that lets you know, like, they're there to do research. It wasn't an accident. Or if it was an accident for one person, the next person might have looked at 18 pages on our website and, went down the rabbit hole. Since the invasion of Gaza, we've seen it shift from 40,000 a year to about 20,000 a month. So we had to upgrade our website like 3 times in that towards the end of 2023 because it kept crashing. So unfortunately, this terrible situation where kind of my theory is it's, much of it's US weapons, but because it's not the US military doing it, there's not a lot of times I think people feel this tug between maybe they don't like what the US military is doing, but they want to support the troops. And here, there are none of our troops to support. So I think it's made it easier. And I think because it's not a US war, we've been able to see more of what's actually happening in Gaza. There's been the social media and even the regular nightly news has been much more forthcoming and showing images and what's actually happening than in US wars since Vietnam. Oh, I think there's a new question in there. My accountant has never heard of war tax resistance and is reluctant to work with me if I do it. Are the people in your, we don't have any CPAs. Again, I get asked this all the time. Someone called me a couple of days ago about this. And even if I did know people, which I don't, I'd feel weary of recommending them because let's say someone contacted the office and told me that they're a war tax resistor or open to it as a CPA in California. I don't know if they're any good. So it's kind of like the person who flies the plane. I don't ask them what their faith is, or are they, I just want to make sure they know how to get off the ground and land. And this is truthfully the same with CPAs. Granted, sometimes you do run in that situation where a CPA might be wary of working with you, but the CPA is, again, they don't know this because they were never taught it, but they should kind of know this, that if they help someone fill out their tax forms who's going to resist payment of them, their name gets signed on there. But the only thing that they're agreeing to is that the taxes are accurate. If you decide not to pay, whoever does your taxes is not liable in any way. So, part of this is letting CPAs know what the actual risk or non-risk is. And so there's, they're rightly afraid. They're afraid of the IRS just like everybody. I mean, they're not rightly afraid, but that's just our culture. Judith.
Were you going to talk a little bit about the Peace Tax Fund?
Thank you for reminding me about that. So let me look up their address. So some of you, the Peace Tax Fund, they've been around for many decades. They're kind of working on the legislative angle of tax resistance. And they're every session of Congress trying to introduce legislation that essentially would expand conscientious objection to the payment of taxes so that anyone who in essence would mark themselves down as a conscientious objector would not have any of their taxes used for the war. Obviously in this situation, unless we reached a critical mass, well, one, that there doesn't appear to be enough support for that to be considered a viable option in the near future. But if it did ever become a reality, then it'd be trying to build a critical mass of people so that they just couldn't take all the money they need from the military from those who aren't checking that box. So this is more common. This is there's a bigger push for this type of legislation in other countries where there are war tax resistors, because in most other countries where taxes are removed from one's paycheck, they don't let you, the employee, decide what to have taken out. Most other countries, it is set up by the government how much will be removed. And so we have a much greater, a much easier time to, as employees, to not pay in. It's not not an option in other places.
I think we have a few more minutes if there's any more questions. We're getting to the end of our 75-minute mark, but Lorin, go ahead.
I wanted to just share a story in my own case that's maybe a bit unusual. One year, my wife and I file separately because she doesn't, well, she kind of agrees with what I'm doing, but she doesn't like the idea of going to jail or whatever, or getting into endless hassles with the IRS, whereas I seem to enjoy it. Anyway, so one year I file and I do her tax return for her. And so I got a letter back from the IRS, and they imposed, they took a penalty out of my wife's taxes, and it was exactly to the dollar the amount that I had refused to pay in my taxes. And in other words, they were I assume this was not an IRS policy. This was just some individual agent couldn't figure out what the hell to do. So he said, well, maybe we can steal it from his wife. So I wrote them a letter back and said, is this really, I mean, it was so clear. I mean, it was like a 4-digit figure that would match. And I wrote the letter back and said, are you really stooping that low to steal it from one taxpayer to pay for the other's sins? And the IRS, to their credit, backed off immediately.
They returned the money?
They changed the I don't remember how that worked. I guess they were claiming that my wife still owed more money.
Okay.
But so that's how it came. But this is obviously not a coincidence that the 4-digit amount was precisely the same. Yeah.
Lorin, you're in California, right?
Yes, I am.
So actually, this is a perfect introduction to community property states. So you might be, there's these community property states, which includes Wisconsin, where I am, California, where Lorin is. It's not really based on whether you're a Democrat or Republican state, but these laws came into effect decades ago. They essentially, unless there's a prenuptial agreement in place, they state that if you are married and living in one of those states, their marriage law states that any income or debt that you obtain, any spouse obtains after you're married, belongs to both spouses. So I think if the IRS had done it, they'd be right. They'd have no problem doing it in California. That's one reason my wife and we had to have a serious discussion before we got married, because we knew we're in a community property state. And even if we file separately, that we'd both be liable. Now, again, the IRS, for people who file separately in community property states, it takes them more time to really think about that, figure it out. They might not ever go after the non-war tax resistor spouse, but they are technically liable. But in people who aren't in these few states, it's common for war tax resistors, if they have a spouse who doesn't want to war tax resist or is lower income, they'll have that person own the home, own the car, just to be safe in case the IRS started collecting again, put everything in the spouse's name. But in these community property states, if the IRS is on the ball, they would know that that actually doesn't protect the property. Mhm. Any other, I think we have time for a quick question if there's or Joyce?
I just wanted to thank you all. I think this was a very informative breakout session. I really appreciate all of your personal witnesses and all of your courage for doing this. It's really touched me. Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you, Joyce.
Joyce, thank you for saying it. Absolutely. It's been a remarkable testimony and a crowd of both real experienced crowd and people with questions because they are delving deeper. And thank you very much. If you'd like to be more part of the Pax Christi Nuclear Disarmament Advisory Working Board, Ronnie, I want to give a shout out to our chair who initiated this. Thank you very much, Ronnie. Thank you to our speakers, Lincoln Rice, Judith Kelly, and Lorin Peters. And I hope for you all to continue your prayer in in the rest of our day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And Christopher, thank you very much for being our moderator. We appreciate it. And thank
Yes.
you to all our panelists. I think Judy Code is in the process of trying to close this out. Some message just flashed across the screen. And I think they're about to close this. I'm not really sure what happens if we, I think we can leave the room, and I think if we leave the room, we'll be back in the main room. So I think we'll just say thank you, everyone. And in the bottom right-hand corner, if you press the button for leave the room, you should return, and there's some kind of final prayer, and you will. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bottom right-hand corner is the leave the room button.